I was in my fifth period, which was biology class. The door to my biology classroom was outside the second story, near a bridge that overlooked the senior patio, which was a large outdoor place for students to eat lunch. It was lunchtime for half of the school, so we were able to hear the students talking and laughing. It was a gloomy day, very cloudy and windy. A thunderstorm was approaching, but it hadn't started raining yet. Suddenly, the talking and laughing from the lunch patio changed. We heard the students screaming, loudly. My teacher looked out the window and she saw all the students who were eating outside running into the second gym, which was right next to the lunch patio. Our teacher assumed that there must have been a tornado, so she told us to get under our desks and cover our necks. A few seconds later, we heard the intercom turn on. A voice said,
"Code Red,"
and the intercom hung up. Code Red means a lockdown at my school. My teacher had us all hiding in the corner, out of view of the windows. My teacher had to crawl on her stomach to lock the door, close the blinds, cover the window and the door, and turn off the lights. It was obvious this wasn't just a drill. Most of us were crying. We were terrified. What you're now looking at is the picture of the 911 call made on that day. When the school is under a code red, students aren't allowed to be on their phones. But some students in my class disobeyed that rule. They Googled what was going on. There was a news alert of there being an active shooter at a high school. Our school. The school was very quiet. It was very eerie. You could hear a pin drop. About 15 minutes after we were put under a lockdown, we heard multiple helicopters flying over the school. All nearby police officers were told to come to the school. The road outside of the school was closed because parents were lining up around the gate, surrounding the school, crying for their children. After what seemed like hours of sitting in the silent classroom, our door was broken down, despite it being locked. Men ran in with large guns in their hands, the ones with lasers at the top. It was the SWAT team. My teacher wasn't wearing her school ID that day, so they pinned her on the ground and searched her. The SWAT team told all of my classmates to put our hands on our heads and to not move them. They made us get in a line, one SWAT member at the front of the line, one at the back. They said something along the lines of, "We're getting you guys out of here." And we all ran in a line through the halls as fast as we could, down the stairs and out of the main entrance. When we made it to the parking lot, there were tons of police officers and emergency personnel. Parents were still surrounding the gate. It turns out there wasn't actually a shooter. A student at the middle school next door prank called 911 saying there was a shooter in the cafeteria of my school. When I was in the third grade, my classroom had windows that faced the playground. We were all inside doing our work calmly when someone asked what was happening outside. We knew it was time for the special needs to play, and our school integrated that class with others regularly, so most of the class personally knew those kids and ran to the windows worriedly. The principal, special needs teachers, and some other random teachers were all outside rushing their kids inside as fast as possible. Not an easy task when normally they have to coax them in at their own pace. And the teacher has us go back to our seats and promised to find info for us over lunch. About 10 minutes later, a lockdown was announced over the intercom. At this point, we're all really concerned about the other kids. Our teacher assures us everything is fine and we'll know more soon and continues the lesson. Within minutes, we start seeing administration and teachers rushing up and down the hallways. And after a few more minutes, we see students rushing with them too, and there's a general feel of panic and urgency. Our teacher decides to allow everybody to do free time, which is actually us being allowed to get any crafts or books out that we want and do anything, including talking, as long as we are being active in some way aside from talking. We do this a little reluctantly, knowing she's just trying to distract us. At about an hour into the lockdown, the principal knocks on the door for our teacher. Vice principal takes over our class, and the teacher goes out with the principal, walks a little bit away but doesn't realize we can still see her. As the principal talks, we suddenly see our teacher begin to cry and then collapse to the ground. We all start bombarding the vice principal with questions. Who is a stick in the mud and yells at us to keep quiet or we'll get detention. Now students are crying and we're all whispering, stressing out even worse, and the vice principal ignores us and just keeps tapping a pencil on the desk, driving us crazy. About 20 minutes after our teacher left the room, our TV suddenly comes on without warning. They're controlled by the main office of the school and normally are only on for morning announcements and evening school appropriate news. This is around 11 a.m., so we're all confused, and suddenly the TV announces updating all of us regarding the tragedy of 9/11. We found out later that our school was placed on lockdown because of our proximity to DC, airports, an important racetrack, and several tourist attractions. We also discovered that everybody that the school knew was connected to someone in an area of the tragedies was pulled out to be told privately before it was announced to the classes. Our parents were informed the moment the lockdown occurred and were advised to only pick us up if it's deemed absolutely necessary. They weren't told that the school would tell us what was happening, and many parents were quite angry that their kids came home distraught and not completely understanding the tragedy. It was absolutely terrifying the way that things were handled, but everything about that day was terrifying. My teacher's father worked in the Pentagon but survived that day. She took a week off from school because of the stress and terror. I remember a lot of kids not coming to school, and that the rest of the month involved very little teaching by any of our teachers. I'm very happy I'm not in school anymore. I graduated a few years ago, but more and more every day I hear about incidents at school. On the news, on the internet, on my texts my friends send me, all sorts of horror stories. But the stories online are the ones I'm always finding myself glancing through. I've seen stories online of people relating how their school went into lockdown. And the story ends up being about some hobo who had been living under the school, or some crazy person from down the street who finally snapped one day. I don't know if they're true, but all I know is our school went into lockdown once. And I don't know if even the people at my school know the whole story as to what happened. I don't even know if I understand it myself. It still seems like a sort of fever dream, something that didn't happen, couldn't happen. It was the middle of the third period, math. I had just finished a big test. I found out later I had made a bunch of mistakes and ended up getting a D, but that's not really important to the story. I used the hall pass to go use the bathroom. Unfortunately, the school bathrooms were located at the stairwells, and of course, the bathrooms on the first floor, where I was, were closed for repairs. I had to go up to the second floor, but before I got there, the bell rang. The bell never rang during class before, but as it did, an announcement came over the PA.
Students and faculty, we are entering lockdown. This is not a drill. Please, all students and faculty, follow all the school procedures.
I froze. I could hear sirens approaching. I came out the stairwell, but already the doors in the hallway were closing, and I could hear them locking. I was alone and out in the open. I could go into the bathroom now, but the doors had no locks on them since my freshman year, after some juniors trapped the freshman in the bathroom and duct taped him inside a stall. They removed the ability to lock them at all. If there was somebody wandering at the school, I'd have no chance if I went in there. I ran down the hall. I could see classrooms turning out their lights and covering the windows. I couldn't turn to them for help. All the instructions said to not answer the door. I had to find some place safe nearby before something happened. I turned a corner and I saw my chance. The janitor's closet was open. Lunch was up next period, so he was probably out setting tables when the announcement was made. He wasn't in there, and it could easily be locked from inside, so I jumped in and shut off the light. The only light I saw was from the bottom of the floor. I waited, and the sirens grew closer and eventually stopped. Time passed, and I wasn't sure if I was happy that I couldn't hear anything going on, or tense because I had no idea what was happening. Then I heard footsteps. Lots of them. They stopped in the hallway. It must have been the police. I could hear radios and other assorted noises. I didn't think it could be some sort of lone gunman or nutcase, so I listened. One guy in particular sounded like the one in charge.
Okay, we are in position.
Another guy answered. I didn't know what his rank was, but clearly he was in charge of the first guy.
Yes, sir. We know the suspect is here in the building. C team is across the campus, as ordered, and B team is covering the back entrances. He will not exit the building on our watch.
The chief responded. Good. Remember, he could look like anyone, but he must not escape. It's my fault he's here, and it's my duty to deal with him. I couldn't hear much for a while. There was too much movement, too many people all talking to each other to make out anybody from where I sat. I just waited for a little while. Maybe it'll all just be over soon, and I could leave the closet and go back to class. Then, that's when it happened. The chief yelled out, "Hold it! Put your hands in the air!" The commotion outside stopped abruptly. A moment later, clothes rustled loudly. What sounded like a large number of guns were drawn. "Lay down on the ground. Leave your hands where we can see them." It stayed quiet, except for a few of the guns cocking. "I said down the ground. Don't you dare try what I think you're going to do. You're not at the institute anymore." I thought I would hear shots go off, back and forth, and eventually somebody saying "suspect down." What I didn't expect was the scream. It wasn't a normal scream. It wasn't somebody crying out in terror. It was like a wounded animal mixed with sound of a bandsaw hitting the concrete. I've never heard anything like it before, and I hope I never hear it again. Then the guns began to fire. The horrible scream happened again. And then other screams, and then the sounds of tearing. I saw the shadows under the door as people moved and fell over, and heard the telltale splatter of gore as it soaked the floor. There was another gunshot, and I eventually yelled out myself when a bullet punched through part of the doorway. It wasn't very big, but I put my eye up against it, and I could see a group of people being attacked by somebody. But something wasn't right about him. He looked too long in places, like he'd been stretched in a turfy machine. He was moving so fast, though, as I couldn't make anything out except for him grabbing people and throwing them around like they were nothing. There was blood everywhere. More gunshots. The screams happened again and again. I pulled away from the bullet hole and sat back in the closet. Then the scream began to fade. I heard a thud, and then more footsteps. The chief spoke again, but he was breathing heavily, like he had been badly wounded. "Team A, he's down. I repeat, he's down. We need a cleanup immediately." I didn't move. I wanted to look again, but as curious as I was, I didn't really want to see. But I heard a lot of commotion for a long time, and then nothing. I don't know how long it was after that, but then the PA announced the lockdown had ended. I came out of the closet. I tried not to look, but for all the sounds I had heard, there was not as much sign of a fight as I thought there would be. Even the blood I had seen in the brief time through the bullet hole had all been removed. I went back to my class and just told everyone I had hid in the store in the bathroom. People were impressed with my guts for doing it. But if nobody else had heard the scream, I certainly didn't want to bring it up. As you might expect, we all went home early that day. Police and EMT were everywhere, but as far as I could see, nobody was being taken away either. My parents came and were so happy that I was alright. They had been following everything on the news and came as soon as they could. At home that night, I ate dinner and waited to see what happened on the news. The live coverage had ended a long time ago, but when the news came back on at 10, I wanted to see everything. As it started, I saw classes had been cancelled for the rest of the week, but then things started to get weird. The news talked about a student who they refused to name, how he had come to the school armed but had been taken into custody for a short firefight. Stranger still, in the footage of a hallway where the scuffle had taken place, the door of the closet which had been my refuge was totally unscathed. Not so much as a scratch on it, let alone bullet holes. It appeared to have been replaced outright, well before any investigation could have been completed. I saw pictures of the student being led away in cuffs. He didn't have a mark on him. He wasn't even wounded as he was pushed into a police car and driven away. All I saw was him fighting and yelling. Even in my glimpses through the bullet hole, I knew that wasn't the same one I saw. The clothes were completely different. The one I had seen had been wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. The one getting into the police car was wearing a white t-shirt and shorts. The news said no one had been hurt despite the gunfire, but I knew people had been wounded, even killed. I'd heard them screaming in agony as something vicious had attacked them. And then there was what that chief guy said, talking about something being his fault. The institution, that he could look like anyone. I don't know what happened that day for certain. I didn't see enough. I didn't hear enough to get the full story. But this is what I can tell you. I know there was no shooter at our school. I know that someone was arrested that day. Someone who I didn't know, who I never heard about ever again. That's right, a shooter who never made another day's worth of news. Just disappeared. When was the last time that ever happened? I know that chief guy and his squads were not cops. I don't know who they were, but I know cops don't clean up a crime scene like that. And no human being has ever screamed like that. Ever. But whatever it was that I heard attacking those people, all I know is it came into the hallway where I was. I was alone, and if it hadn't been for the janitor's closet, I wouldn't have been safe. It could have looked like anyone. Something tells me that that squad wouldn't have helped me either. It could have looked like anyone. What was it? How long had it been in our school? Had I ever been alone with it and never knew what it was? Who were those people who had come for it? Where had it come from? And good God, is it really dead?